Organizations Thrive. Today I have the pleasure of Jarie Bolander. Welcome to you, Jarie. How are you doing?
Thank you for having me, Julian. Doing great. It's a little bit rainy here in San Francisco. I larken it back or think of it like, God, am I in London or Manchester today? Because it's doom and gloom. No offense to them, but wow, like it's April. Let's get on with some sun.
Yes, well, you're aligning with the UK, so that's always a good thing, I think, for this podcast
100%.
conversation.
100%.
So you are a B2B growth strategist,
Mhm.
also the author of the book Ride or Die: Loving Through Tragedy, a Husband's Memoir. And today we're going to be exploring how you navigated the loss of your wife, Jane, and that book, Ride or Die book, and your lessons in resilience. And I think there's going to be, as much as before people sort of switch off and think that's not for me in a leadership context, actually, I think there's some lessons here of how we navigate loss, whether that's loss of, of business, loss of a client, loss of, a job, whatever loss may be. It affects us all in some shape or form, and it may be a loss of a loved one. And so I think there's going to be some real lessons in this today. But before we get into that conversation, Jarie, I would like to ask you, what do you love about what you do?
Well, I work for Decision Counsel. We're a B2B sales and marketing strategy consultancy. We work on very complex companies, long sales cycle, very tech heavy. And the thing I love about that the most is explaining complex things in a simple way. So a lot of storytelling, a lot of, gee, how are we going to explain this whiz bang gizmo-y thing that is super cool, but literally there's probably maybe a half a dozen people in the world that understand how it works, right? Kind of like AI. It's like, oh, AI is cool, but I don't know, who knows how it works, right? So that, and the fact that we have such a diverse clientele, a lot of financial companies, a lot of data companies, a lot of media companies. And it's just been such a fascinating journey because, we have all these varying, types of companies, but they all fundamentally have some similar problems. And their similar problem is how to get their story straight and how to tell the market what they do. And that's actually the hardest thing. I mean, building the tech seems easy, like telling people about it so they actually care. Boy, that's the art. And that's why I'll have a job forever. I mean, not even AI can take that away from me, at least not yet. Right?
Yeah, I don't think it can actually. And it's interesting. I was talking to somebody recently about launching new products, and they said, actually, why don't we? One company does this. They almost start with the marketing campaign before they even think about the actual product they're going to launch, because the important piece is how you explain this, how do you articulate this, and actually by doing that, you understand the audience, the target market, the problem, and then you reverse engineer everything back. And it's, I think more and more storytelling is a powerful tool, and this is what we're doing today. This is all part of storytelling.
Right.
Human beings love hearing stories. It can be stories of gossip sometimes. It can be a story they can really impact you. And I hope today your story we're going to talk about will impact people, and we'll get some real insights from that. And so we're going to explore that. And I'd like to ask you, and I know this is, you've said this a lot of time, but it's still, I want to be sensitive in the context of what I'm talking about here. But share with your initial emotions and challenges you faced when you lost your wife, Jane, a number of years ago.
Yeah, no, it was painful, sorrowful, anger, despair, distraught, pissed off, angry. I mean, just name every negative emotion you can think of. She died when she was 36, right? It's way too young, and I think what was just horrible about the whole thing, right? We were actually newlyweds almost. I think we were married a little over a year when we found out she had leukemia, because we were trying to have kids. And so she had a bunch of miscarriages, and they're like, what the hell is going on? And, the day after Christmas, 2015, we go to the ER and they're like, we think you have leukemia. So it was horrible. And I did a lot of bad things to kind of help myself. I thought I was helping myself. I drank a lot. I smoked a lot of pot. I ate a lot of sugary snacks. I didn't work out. I did all the bad thing, like literally down the rabbit hole of like, oh God, like what the hell am I going to do? Partly because I just couldn't, I was so numb. I couldn't feel anything. I thought the world ended. And in one sense it did end, right? I mean, any kind of loss, the extreme loss obviously is you lose a kid, you lose a loved one. That's the most extreme form of loss, like someone you can no longer talk to. But other losses have similar emotional reactions depending on how well you've prepared for them, your disposition. There's like gradients of it, or a spectrum of loss, right? Loss and grief and sorrow is just part of life. And I really, yeah, it was like a fun, there's few things in your life where it's like, wow, today is way different than yesterday, and my life changed in an instant. Holy shit! Now what do I do? I'm sorry, probably shouldn't swear. Sorry, LinkedIn. But we're talking real here. It was horrible, and I hope no one has to go through that. Unfortunately, that's probably a false statement. Every one of us.
And what those emotions? I mean, when you got the news that she had leukemia, I mean that's a shock in itself, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then was there what was the sort of journey of time and what went on that sort of process before you lost her?
So she battled leukemia for 15 months. So during that whole process, that whole, journey, I guess, that's what the book's about. The book's about our entire relationship, but the core of it is that 15 months that we battled, or she battled leukemia, and I helped her as her full-time caregiver and also the CEO of her company, which is a whole other story and chaotic. But that, when your life changes in an instant, when your loved one has a life-threatening disease, like yesterday was Christmas, today you have leukemia. What are we going to do, right? And thankfully, I had training in endurance events and extreme sports, which is a great test bed for dealing with the challenges and being more resilient, just to be honest, because you never rise to the occasion. You always fall to your training. Time and time and time again, when you're under stress and strain and all sorts of stuff, if you've never experienced that, you're just going to go back to some state that's not your best self. You never rise to the occasion, no matter what anyone says. You fall to the training. And that was a fundamental, like, I'm so glad that I had that training in endurance events, that I had a community of people that loved me, and we had family that was local, that really sort of solidified, okay, now what? Now what are we going to do? And when you have that base and you've built up this resilience and you've practiced it, which sounds silly, like how would I practice like your wife getting leukemia? Well, you sort of don't, but you can also in other ways practice being uncomfortable, being cold, being wet, going out of your comfort zone, like coming up against something where, you know what, I got a 50-50 shot of maybe this won't work. It's a muscle, right? Like any muscle,
Give me some examples of that, because that's interesting, because I think I believe resilience is a muscle as well. I think you can grow it, just like weights at the gym type of thing. Give me an example of some of the practices you put in place in your life before this happened that enabled you to withstand that shock of leukemia and then ultimately losing your wife.
Yeah. So I think the discipline of working out daily was one that allows you to build up a certain level of, I have to do this today, no matter what. That and pushing yourself to the limit of exhaustion. And that may be different things for different people. Like for me, it was multi-day endurance events where I wouldn't sleep, or 50-mile run, or a Ironman. Like, and there were various other reasons I did those, because, childhood and, all the other, or family of origin stuff that people talk about. But I think it's the discipline of being able to do things when you don't want to. You'll wake up and you're like, I really don't want to go to the gym today, and then doing it. Or little things like, today I'm going to push a little harder on my run, or I'm going to lift a little more weight, or I'm going to take the stairs instead of the elevator, or I'm going to wait an hour to eat. Like these little things that sort of get you out of the comfort zone, break the frame of reference. It's like, it's practice for the unknown and being comfortable being uncomfortable, which I think is one thing that stuff really does condition you to. Because, like you're running, let's say you're running a marathon and you're like bonk at mile 20 and you're like, okay, now what? Like your body and you can keep going. Your mind does not want you to keep going. It will do every trick to be like, oh, just stop, have a donut. Why not? You've done 20 miles. Good for you. And you're like, no, I need to. What you learn is I got to just take the next step. I got to get to that next flag, that next, power pole. I got to get to the next aid station. So you start to really play the mind games of this incremental. You know what? Just go for 10 more seconds. And that during, Jane's diagnosis, treatment, and then eventual death, I would try to just make it to the next day, or just make it to the next minute. Like there were times where I wanted to just walk away. I'll be honest. I'm like, this is miserable, but those are fleeting feelings. And the reason why is because you're overwhelmed and don't know what to do. And when you're generally overwhelmed, you try to get out of the situation. And so I like to say I'd take a knee. Like, I used to play sports in high school. And when I was a kid, I said, just take a knee, just take a knee, think for just 5 seconds or 3 seconds, or just take a breath. Okay, now what? And it's amazing what that'll do, right? Amazing. Because you're all like, there would be times where I'd walk into Jane's hospital room and she would just go off on a rant, or some of it's in the book, where I'm just like, what do I do with this? It's like, I really want to leave now and go smoke some pot and then come back, but I can't because I need to help her take a shower, clean the things up, get her up to speed on the business. I'm just like,
So that was one of your almost coping strategies, I guess, that taking a breath or taking a knee, and that's that pausing just to sort of clear the head, stop the sort of franticness going on. Was there any other things that you adopted that you've continued to use in your day-to-day life now, in terms of when you get a shock of something? Because you're right, life is uncertain, and life appears unfair at times.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
But I always say to people, although it obviously feels personal to you, but it's not a personal thing on anybody. No. But it just still feels personal and unfair. But what other things did you adopt? Because people might be listening here right now, and it might not have such the loss that you've talked about, but they may be thinking they've been looked over in a promotion, or they've just lost a big client because they made a mistake or whatever, something pretty bad. How can they sort of, I suppose, get back up? Because you must have been moments when you sort of fell down and thought, how do I get myself back up into this situation? How do I get back onto the horse of life, so to speak?
Yeah, and all those things you just mentioned have happened to me too. So it's like,
well, there we go. Yeah,
I mean, lose a client, screw up, get laid off, shut a company down. I mean, I'm an entrepreneur, right? Like, imagine anything that could go wrong with a startup, and I've probably pretty much been through it. And so, yeah, I mean, in the extreme case of what I went through, which again is extreme, there's obviously powerful lessons there. And the thing that I learned that I adopt today is the idea of taking a knee, the idea of, this sounds a little like morose, but I'm like, is anyone going to die if I don't make this decision today? Like, is this reversible or irreversible? Is anyone, no one's shooting at us. This is like, I do sales and marketing consulting. Like no one dies on the operating table if I get the messaging wrong. Now people are upset, right? And they're like, we paid you all this money. But like no one's going to die, right? So I always try to break the frame and the perspective. Like, is this really that important? Like, is this, sales deck really going to matter if I get it done a day after or whatever? Because people, even though it's not as an extreme thing, it's not life or death, or it's not losing a spouse, it doesn't matter. Like it feels the same. It feels the same when you lose a client. Oh my God, the world's going to end. How am I going to make payroll? It feels the same when, I screwed up and my boss just yelled at me, or I got laid off, or the feelings are the same. Now, it may not be as level of intensity, but it's still the same emotions, right? So I do that. I try to work out at least 5 to 6 days a week, I think, and take a walk or something that's like that. I also try to not work as much. I'm entrepreneur, so like I'm always working, like I'm always thinking. But what I try to do is take some downtime, like to take some perspective, and then I just try to hang out with a friend each week. Because when I was going through the stuff with Jane, what happened was I felt really isolated. And not because people didn't want to hang out, and not because people weren't there and caring. We had great friends, great family. I was just overwhelmed and didn't know how to talk about anything else, right? Then let's fix Jane. Let's make sure she's okay. And people would get uncomfortable talking about it too. And then, again, which I don't blame. It's a horrible situation to be in. But it felt isolating and lonely. And so that is not good for your mental health. Especially if you're a man, you tend to be like a little more like, I can fix this and we'll just work harder. Sometimes working harder just doesn't matter. Like the universe does not care. It's not personal. It just so happens that it rolled the dice and it's on you today. It'll be on Julian tomorrow. It'll be on Jarie the next day, right? We tend to take that stuff personally, and to a certain degree it is like, how can you not? But there's other things, like if you put out the effort and it it zigged when you zagged, it's hard to realize that. But then it's also, once you realize that, this is the way it is. I need to adapt and overcome, and I need to adjust. So I think those are the things that are the most helpful that I continue today.
Yeah, community. I was going to ask you about that, because obviously when you were going through, the sort of leukemia sort of treatments and the loss, having community is so important. And I'm writing a book at the moment on team resilience, and part of that is there's an aspect on personal resilience, and I talk about having a community around you, whether that's work, family, other networks, it doesn't matter, but communities around you, because they give you not only the support, which is obviously you need, and that sort of moral support, and somebody just to listen to rant out all the various scenarios, but sometimes people can give you that different perspective on life, can't they? And I know I had a situation a few years ago where my business was just not in a good place, and somebody just said, why don't you do this and this? And it was just really, really, really sort of obvious now I look back, but at the time it was really helpful, and it shifted me and my thinking. And I think sometimes having that different perspective, but also having people around you who will challenge your thinking as well, or challenge what you're doing in obviously in a way that's respectful and kind, can be really helpful. And I think the more I've learned, certainly being an entrepreneur, is to be not an island at all. And I know blokes find it more difficult than probably more than women do, but to have that community, have buddies to have a beer with and go for a walk with, or go for whatever it may be, is really valuable. Through your experience, has it, and I'm sure it has, and I almost should ask a question, what has your perspective on life changed, and what has changed in that, and how do you view life on almost like a daily basis now?
Every day is precious. Even the shitty days are precious. I mean, like, just be happy you have another day. And again, it may be a bad day or a good day, but it's a day. And I remember that because Jane doesn't have any more days, and people that are gone don't have any more days. And so for me, living every day as, I mean, not as if it was your last, which, I mean, I know a lot of people think like, oh, be hedonistic or whatever. That's not the message. I think just be thankful for the day you have, and then try to use it as best you can. And for me, I tend to now want to be of service and help folks, really make people not feel so alone in their grief and tragedy like I felt at times, and just talk about, how to build better men. Like, it's funny because you're right, like most men just auger down and like, I can fix this, whatever, and you mentioned the community aspect, which was huge for me. I had a workout group that was consistent, and we challenged each other. We didn't let each other slack. If we were, screwing around, it was like held accountable, and like, in some cases ribbing each other, like what men do, what guys do, what blokes do, like lads, like the lad Bible is one of the things I like to follow sometimes. And they're just like the funniest, great, but it's like true, right? There's different aspects of it depending on who you are and how you relate, right? So traditionally in society, sharing your feelings as a man is not the best thing, well, I'm not encouraged, but certainly not looked upon with like, oh, this great, fanfare, but with your buddies and your lads and your blokes, or whoever, the blokes, or the whatever we call them. I'm trying to be international here and failing miserably. You guys know the shared vision. I mean, you can also, when you have a community, there's, people can share the load. To your point, I love what you brought up about having to struggle with the business. I start talking to other people that I trust. They give me a perspective, which at the time you didn't know, but it's like, this is obvious, but they helped you share the load, the burden, because the burdens as an entrepreneur is massive. This is a tough gig. It's like, you cannot do it alone. I don't care what anyone says. There's no self-made entrepreneur ever. Any one of the people that says that is just full of themselves, because it takes an entire team to build something from nothing, because the world and the status quo does not care about your stuff, does not care one iota. It's not personal, doesn't care equally about any of it. Like, people, like, you got to convince them, right? And it's a horrible, hard, extremely frustrating job. That's probably one of the most rewarding, other than probably raising kids, that you'll ever do, because creating something from nothing, entrepreneurs, we're the creatives of the business world. Like, we believe, like, we're the idiots. They'd be like, yeah, what a horrible idea. Where do I sign up? Like, that's the people we are.
I know. It's great, isn't it?
It's great. And you're like, why would I ever not do this? But I know.
It's funny because it took me up until about 7 years ago to do that very thing, I think. But I've always had this entrepreneurialness in me, but probably never had the guts, to be honest. And an opportunity came up, and the way it all worked out, and I took that opportunity. Perhaps I was pushed as well. Who knows? But
well, there's that too, right? It's like,
yes,
like someone just taps, "Hey, Julian, I think it's time," and you're like, "Oh, I don't want to." No. Here you go.
Yeah, and despite the challenges you have and the ups and downs and everything else, I wouldn't rewind the clock at all, and I wouldn't go back. And I love what I do, and that's weirdly being even more comfortable by being uncomfortable, and that's uncertainty, which is interesting in life. We're talking about men, but not just men, but the whole vulnerability piece, because obviously, where you do share things, and leaders might be listening right now, and I think sometimes leaders often feel, and this is certainly the case 4 years ago in the pandemic, they need to know the answers. They need to know how to navigate, how to work his way out of this situation. And I remember speaking to lots of leaders then who, frankly, didn't, because we were all in this thing. We've never been there before.
Who knows? No playbook at all. Zero.
Yeah, exactly. And I think leaders feel they need to know, but actually you don't need to know. And it's how have you worked that whole sort of vulnerability piece where you'll step into something unknown, and which takes a bit of courage to do that, and not knowing the outcome, whether it's going to be a good thing or a bad thing, or just an ugly thing, who knows what it's going to be. How have you sort of navigated that and worked that through? What have been the sort of, I guess, strategies or things that have helped you to be in that place?
Yeah. So that's a deep and insightful question, because this is a common thing that literally every leader that leads any organization or any entrepreneur, right? Like, you just don't know the future. And I think once you admit that, then life becomes a little easier. Hard to admit that you don't have all the answers, but no one believes you that you have all the answers. It's like absolute BS. Like, you just can't. If you're building something from nothing and you're trying to navigate the complexities of just name it, it's unauthentic and factually wrong that you know every answer. And what'll happen is that you will get yourself down a rabbit hole, and you'll start to cover up bad decisions, and then that'll lead to your eventual failure, which you just see countless examples of that. Even successful entrepreneurs in the news, like, everyone thinks that they're some sort of oracle or some sort of god of entrepreneurship. Just name them, and they've all failed. They're just either good at covering them up, or they have systems in place where that failure is not catastrophic. So the strategies that I employ is, as a leader, you're in charge of, okay, where's the promised land? Where are we going? Like, my vision for where we're going is X. This is where we're going. Generally, directionally, that doesn't change. Over time, just doesn't. Like most strategy, if it's a good strategy, it's like, this is where we're going. Now, how do I get there? I have no clue. Honestly, zero clue. That's where you leave it up to your team. Look, you're the tactical navigators of this landscape. I'm going to help navigate and get the barrier, as many of the barriers out of your way as humanly possible, but I'm relying on you to navigate tactically to the promised land or to the goal or to whatever. This is the whole idea that actually comes from the military of decentralized command, right? Like, if I'm the general back at headquarters and you're the troop in the field, I'm not going to tell you what to do, because you're getting shot at. Like, it's the ultimate extreme, right? Like, you're getting shot at, like, you figure it out, but I need you to get to this hill. You figure it out. And I think when a leader does that, the uncertainty of how to get there, the burden goes away, because you're like, I trust that you guys will do that. And if you need help, let me know. But my job as a leader is to set the strategic direction, remove as many barriers as I can, and give resources to the team to get the job done. That's it. My job's not to do the job. My job's not to tell them how to do the job. My job is to set the strategy, remove barriers, and fund or give them resources. And as a leader, that is liberating, right? Because you're like, okay, I don't have to now know all the answers, because I don't. Again, you will never know all the answers, full stop. That's 100% correct, provable. Like, it's like one of those, universal realities, right? So that's the way I roll. I think once you've accepted that, then you just have to be constantly checking your ego, because what'll happen is, as the leader, you have more information than anyone, because you're the one that you set the strategy. So you're accumulating it. You also, depending on what level in an organization you are, people don't tell you the truth. You create a bubble around yourself by how you act. Mm-hmm. And if you act like, I know everything, no one is going to tell you when shit went wrong. No one. You're just going to be in the bubble. I call this the leadership bubble. It's bad. Pop the bubble. You're going to wonder, well, how come this went off the cliff and no one told me? Well, because you have behavior that says failure is unacceptable. Not knowing what to do is unacceptable. People are just going to lie to you. They do it all the time. Now, it doesn't mean that you're not bold. It doesn't mean that you don't have gravitas and you're like, and you don't help the team out. But the way you act directly relates to how they act towards you. They look at you. It's amazing, but every little word you say as the leader gets amplified, interpreted, and ruminated on by more people than you think.
I know it's a thing I talk a lot about and also work with leaders on, is the power of role modeling. The moments, whoever you are, the moment you walk into a room, pick the phone call up, send an email, whoever it is, whoever you are role modeling, whether it's a positive thing or a negative thing. You are being observed. A majority of it is subconscious. It's not conscious, and it's how people learn. It's the most powerful way to train and learn and teach somebody is through role modeling. And it's an important thing to be aware of. And a lot of leaders, don't always have that self-awareness that is what's happening. And so you've got to be really careful with how you say. And as you say, classic example there, we said, when you show that you think you know everything, people won't share things that are going wrong because they think, well, we can't be people like that. We've got people who don't. We've got to know everything. So people will lie and make things up. And so that's where that vulnerability comes in a sense of being, I don't know I know where we're going. I don't know how this is going to work, but let's get together and work it together as a team and how we're going to move this forward. And that actually helps the team be a bit more, human in terms of things.
Yeah. And I don't
make mistakes and everything else.
Yeah, I don't think it's vulnerable at all. I think that's the fallacy. I think it's just thoughtful.
Yeah.
And I think it's the mark of a good leader. Just see countless history, just all the great leaders that have had to really do hard things.
Yeah.
I mean,
definitely. And I think for some people it does feel vulnerable initially.
Oh yeah.
It feels a little bit like, I've got to show that I've not got it all together here.
Yeah.
And that's quite difficult. When you reflect back on your time with your wife and the whole process of leukemia and your loss, is there any sort of standout lessons that you've learned that you've now incorporated, apart from what you've already said? Is there anything that sort of really struck you in how you did a practice or an interaction or a mindset change that has made you think differently and how you move forward?
Yeah. I tell people I love them more often than I used to. I try to be appreciative of the people in my life as much as I can, even though sometimes I bias negative. I'm generally bias more negative than most because I'm an engineer by training and that's what we do. We're always looking for problems. I also try to find the compassion in people that I don't agree with. Like I try to be more compassionate and not just full cloth think that they've got some evil intention. I generally just try to be a more loving and caring person. And also, I think to your point about role modeling, especially for men, like it's okay to share your feelings. I do interviews about the book all the time. And it's funny because most people say, oh, you're so courageous for writing this book and talking about it. And I'm like, I heard that a couple of times. I'm like, I'm not courageous. Jane was courageous in how she handled her life. I was just committed to her. Mm-hmm. And then you sort of hear it more and more. and one of the things that I'm really bad at is like, just take the compliment, you knucklehead. Like, just, like, why are you like, people clearly are moved by this. And it's just funny because sometimes as men, we just don't, or if your attitude, you're like, I could always do better. Right. And so I actually reframed it that I actually thank you, for telling me I have courage, but actually my courage isn't for those that can't talk about this sort of stuff, that are struggling with it. So I'm trying to be courageous for them as well. And I think as a leader, as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, as someone that wants to be more resilient, having the courage and the compassion to like be there for people, tell your truth, bear witness to your struggle, and not in a private pity party way, but in a like, this is life, man. This is what I'm doing about it, And I think if people did that more, you just see a lot more love in the world and a lot more. And it sounds like woo-woo, but it's true. Sorry.
No, it's not woo-woo. It's really good stuff, and it's nice to hear that's really struck with you. And I think we need more of that. We all need more of that. Definitely,
Totally
I
agree.
definitely agree with that. And I just want to thank you for sharing your story. And I know you've probably done it a dozen times or more, very many more times. But it feels really fresh to me from your perspective. And I thank you for the insights you've shared as well, which I think we can all take from a leadership point of view going forward. If people want to sort of connect with you and get in touch with you, what's the best way of doing that, Jarie?
Well, on LinkedIn, I'm usually hanging out on LinkedIn. JarieBolander.com is where I have all my author stuff, yeah, but LinkedIn's probably the best. Just, I'm always hanging out, talking about storytelling and how to tell better stories, and just, sharing. And yeah, I'd love to connect. That'd be great. And can't wait to read the book. And hey, if you want a contribution or an insight or a quote, I'm in. Let me know, because sounds like a great book.
Yeah, much appreciated. I really thank you for your time today. Thank you for coming on.
My pleasure.